Hello everybody, I'll be doing my top 10 favorite reads of 2017. So let's just get to it. Okay, I read a lot of really great books this year. It was a damn good year for reading for me. I went on deployment and I read about 15 books on that, and I was able to read about 15 other books before and after that. And so I read a total of 32 works, including one reread of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and then a short story which was A Temporary Matter by Jhumpa Lahiri. And I'm not going to include Wuthering Heights in this review because if you've watched my videos, you know that it's my favorite book ever, and it just wouldn't be fair. This is my top 10 list of new novels that I've read this year. So starting with number 10 is Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen. This was published originally in 1992 by a priest, and it's kind of the priest's kind of explanation to a non-Christian how Christianity works in a way. And I thought it was beautifully done. There were some incredibly moving pieces in that book, things that were written that I thought nobody else understood, things that I've experienced that I'm like, am I crazy? And then I read it in this book, I said, it was awe-inspiring. And so according to the book, the person he's writing this work for, the non-Christian, doesn't feel that Nouwen achieved what he wanted to do, but I certainly think he did. It's just one of those really great Christian spiritual books that I think is definitely a must-read, especially if you're Catholic, and I especially loved it because of the time it was written. It was the early 90s, and this is a Catholic priest. Just his views on so many controversial issues he was so ahead of his time when it was written, so I highly recommend that book. So number 9 is a surprise last-minute addition to my list. It almost just made my honorable mentions, but it just resonated with me so much, and just I can't explain it. It's just this book just captured something for me that I just can't get out of my head, and I think that it is very deserving in my top 10, and that is Atonement by Ian McEwan. Now, I wanted to read this book for a long time because I remember that the movie came out like 10 years ago, and it looked very interesting, and I know it was a book, and I've heard really great things about it. It's a Man Booker Prize shortlisted, and so I know it's really good quality writing. And so I listened to it as an audiobook driving on a long car trip, and I was blown away. It ended, and I was like, I needed more. It was great. It was so good. Parts 1 and 3, I think, are really the meat and potatoes of this book. Part 2 is really why I have it rated so low and why I almost didn't make my top 10. But because I feel part 2 of the book is completely different. It's like a completely different story than parts 1 and 3. And so it kind of was distracting, but it was still somewhat enjoyable. But parts 1, especially 1 and then 3, definitely make up for part 2. So even if you're hesitant about it, I definitely recommend reading Atonement by Ian McEwan and just trying to get through part 2. I know some people like it, but I certainly didn't. But if you can get through it, and then get to part 3, it's such a worthwhile read. It's a masterpiece of modern literature. Number 8. I was very excited to read this book because I'd heard so much about it. This author is so renowned and well loved by many people, and that is The Secret History. There's already so many video reviews of this novel that I don't know what I could possibly say. It revolves around a group of college students in a New England preppy school, and you find out that they murder one of their classmates in the very beginning of the book. And the first half of the book is basically their entire reasoning for leading up to killing this classmate. And Tart had wanted to kind of make an ode to like the classic poems of the Iliad and the Odyssey, of knowing exactly what's going to happen right in the very beginning of the story, and still creating suspense. And I definitely think she did. This is a very amazing character-driven book. You find out that besides the murder, nothing much really happens in the book, but just the characters are so unique and special and so distinct that they just carry the entire story. They're so interesting, and um, the ending was certainly a surprise. And I just definitely want to reread this again someday so I can appreciate it even more so. And number 7 was one that I wasn't ever thinking I was going to read, and that is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. It was given to me on deployment by a girl I worked with, and she had been reading it, and she'd read it numerous times. And I said, "Oh, that's Milk and Honey. I've heard great things about it." And she just gave it to me to read, and I read it in a few days, and it was mind blowing. It was her illustrations and uh, her poetic beauty is the way it resonates with people, and with me. So many poems I completely identified with, and it's very comforting to know that other people feel the exact way that you do. And I would love to read that book again. It was beautiful, and I want to read her new book that came out, The Sun and Her Flowers. I'm anxious to read that next. And it was a masterpiece. It was beautiful. Now, number 6 is another Man Booker finalist, and that is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, this is the only read, I believe, on this list that I rated 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. And but this is a story that is, despite things I might not have liked about it, I really can't remember what I didn't like about it, because I can remember nothing but good things reading it. It might have been a little slow or somewhat dull at places, but um, it's kind of a mystery. You find out that these kids are at this school growing up, and they can't leave, and they have to draw these art projects, and you don't really understand exactly right yet why they're there or what they are, and it's kind of a slow twist. You find out later on in the story what's exactly happening to these people, these characters, and it's a very sad twist. It's heartbreaking. You're like, oh, that's devastating. But the writing, the character depth, um, are out of this world. I felt so much for these characters, and I listened to this as an audiobook, and it really brought it to life, and it was heartbreaking, yet it was gorgeous at the same time. And so highly recommend this. I want to read it again someday. Maybe I will rate it 5 stars next time, knowing what I already know now, and maybe picking up on things I didn't understand the first time. Yeah, fabulous book. All right, we're into the top 5. Now, this is a book that I wasn't sure if I was ever going to read this one, but I'm so glad I did. I picked it from my October spooky reads books. I like to dedicate special books that I know are going to be extra creepy for October, because it's my favorite month of the year, and it's Halloween. I just love that whole time of the year. So that is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Now, I heard everybody in the world basically has read this book. I was probably the last one in the world to ever read this book. And I'd seen bits and pieces of the movie, so I knew a little bit of the twist, but I wasn't sure. But even knowing a little bit of it, it still completely shocked me. There's so much that can be said about this book. I would love to discuss this in a literary group. My friend and I both read it at the same time and had a little buddy read and had some discussion notes at the end of the book, and we were asking each other the questions, and it was so much fun. People think it's just like this easy read that's just like a cool thriller, but there's so much more to this book. There's so much that can be discussed. Now, it involves the couple Nick and Amy, and you find out that Nick is a very unreliable narrator. He just leaves things out that just brings them up all of a sudden. It just like kind of surprise you when you find out that his wife is missing, and he is the main suspect of this case, possibly murder. We don't know, because And you get both perspectives. You get Nick and you get Amy's perspective, uh, and I just thought it was. I don't want to give too much away because it's definitely a spoilery book, and I don't really care most of the time if I know what happens in a book to enjoy it. But this one, you can enjoy it 10 times more if you don't know the twists and what's going to happen. So I'm going to leave it. If you haven't read this book, read this book. It is a great spooky thriller that's so much depth and definitely the best of it. The best of its kind is truly sensational. Now, number 4 is a book that I'm still highly impressed with. It is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. It is truly an accomplishment of fear and what you can't see, kind of like the monster in the dark. I was terrified reading this book. It was like the tension is, you can cut it with a knife in this book. And this dark world that he created was spine tingling. It was so good. So I made a separate review of this book and I'll link it in the description. All right. Now we are into the top 3 of my favorite books of the year, and I actually have a copy of this one because I can't give it away, partially because it's just aesthetically beautiful, and I want to read it again, so I don't want to give it away. And that is, no surprise, Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This is one of the first books I read this year. I kind of read it at the end of 2016 and into 2017. So this book, it's amazing. It's so good. It's such a great detective thriller. Pessl does her homework, and this is terrifying at times. It is so intelligent. It's heartfelt, and this whole world, again, that this author creates is so eerie and terrifying and dark, and it's just a cool world to escape to. And I also have a review of this one separately, and I'll link it again. Yeah, this book is amazing. No words have to be said. It's Night Film. Now, I still can't decide on 1 and 2, which one is better than the other. They just impressed me both so much that I'm just going to have to call them a tie right now. And that is, I'll just bring them both at the same time, and that is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Now, these books are both completely different, but they both resonated so much with me. This Arundhati Roy's book is just so complex and so amazing. The construction of this novel is superb. It's just one of those books that you will reread it so many times and get different things every time you read it. You feel so much for these characters, even though you don't like all of them. I've never been so inclined to hug a fictional character until I read this book. It's gorgeous. It's such a masterpiece, and I don't even know how to explain the plot of this book. It is the way I think a cool thing that this book does is that you kind of find out the end result at the beginning of the book, and then at the very end of the book, you kind of find out the beginning of the story. And it kind of goes back and forth, different chapters. You find out, you start in the early 90s, I believe, of these 2 siblings in India, and you find out that there was a death maybe 30 years prior of their American cousin. And kind of throughout the entire story, you learn different things of the characters and why they are the way they are. And throughout the transgression of time in different chapters, you kind of learn until you get to the end what led to this death and why the characters are the way they are. Truly amazing. I can't recommend this book enough. Again, it's gorgeous. It's amazing. And every time I see a copy of it at a thrift store, I will pick it up so I can give it to somebody to read it. I will be reading this again, hopefully very soon, because once you finish it, you instantly want to start it over again, knowing the full story now, to see what else you can pick up from it. And it's amazing. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I can't believe I didn't ever read this as a child. This is truly stunning, truly remarkable. a masterpiece of children's literature. I read this over the summer, and I'd always wanted to read it. Of course, I've known about it, like as a rule, like everybody knows what it's like, The Giving Tree and Where the Wild Things Are, The Little Prince. They're all in that same canon of children's classics. But I just never thought to read it, and my parents never read it to me as growing up. I never had a copy, unfortunately. So I was able to read it at the lovely age of 24 for the first time, and I was blown away. This book truly has a very special place in my heart. It might be leaning more on the number one side for me. It's it's gorgeous. There are scenes in this book that are heartbreaking, and I just bawl. Um, and I'm just thinking, why am I bawling my eyes out? This is a children's book, but it's I don't even know what to say about this book. It's gorgeous. It revolves around an air pilot whose plane crashes on a desert island, and he meets the little prince who has gone away from his planet. And then you kind of find out the little prince's journey and the people he meets and kind of who influence the person he becomes and the person that the pilot becomes. So there's so many great lessons in this book, truly, and I just think if you haven't read this book, you need to go to the store and buy this. If you have children, you need to buy this for them and read this to them so they can experience this early on, and that way it will resonate with them and they can read it later in their life and appreciate it probably even more than I did. So this is definitely a book I would love to read, hopefully every year, and it's I don't even know what to say about it. It's truly a remarkable book, and I wish that this author had been able to write more books before, apparently, ironically, he disappeared in a plane. He was a pilot as well, and his plane never returned. After like a year after this book was published, I was under the impression that he'd written many books. He'd written a few memoirs, but this was his only work of fiction. So devastating. But to quote a friend of mine, what a legacy to have The Little Prince. And I agree. So those are my top 10 favorite books of 2017. There are several that I would like to talk about for some honorable mentions. And the first one I'd like to discuss is The Wanderer by Sharon Creech. I've discussed this before, and I'd read this probably about 5th grade, and I couldn't remember really what happened about it throughout the book. So I found a used copy, and I wanted to reread it, and I was so happy I did because it was beautiful. It's a gorgeous children's book, and yeah, this is another book that I would love to read again. It involves a girl named Sophie and her cousin Cody, and they are traveling on a little sailboat, across the ocean to visit her grandfather with her uncles, and kind of these are the two kids' diary entries of their journey, and it is so beautifully written. And then there is a scene at the very end that just it's tear jerking. It's amazing. So highly recommend The Wanderer. Another honorable mention would be The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Now, this book revolves around the story of Patroclus and Achilles, and in their relationship growing up before the Trojan War, and then leading into the Trojan War, and their love relationship throughout their life. And the writing of this book is amazing. She has a beautiful way with words, and I'm just so happy this book exists because not enough books that are LGBT themed are in the mainstream, and this book definitely does that. It is so popular, and I'm so glad so many people love it and cherish it, and that makes me so happy that we're progressing and moving forward in literature and giving more depth. It doesn't just have to be a man and a woman. It can be love is just love, and Yes, it was amazing. And my last honorable mention is Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. Now, I read her book, The Girl on the Train, last year, which basically like rekindled my love for reading books. And but it didn't make my top 10, but it was an amazing book. And I read Into the Water, and it blew me away. It was so much better than The Girl on the Train. It had so much depth. The characters were amazing. Again, not very likable, but still, you just wanted to keep reading to find out what's going to happen. It was so great. Um, so I highly recommended that one to a lot of people if they wanted to read a good thriller or they asked me for just a good recommendation. I'm like, Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. It is truly stunning, and so I had to include it in my honorable mentions. Phenomenal. Now I have a few bookolutions that I would like to accomplish in this 2018, and there's a few books I really would like to read this year that I have my heart set on that are calling to me. And so the first one that I think I would like to read is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I read The Secret History, and it was amazing. And this won the Pulitzer Prize when it was published. And so many people love this book, and I just know I will love it too. If it's half as good as The Secret History, it's amazing. So this will be the next one that I read. Now, one that I've been wanting to read for a long time, and that is The Folded Leaf by William Maxwell. I read his novel So Long See You Tomorrow several years ago, and I've always wanted to read something else by him. And I know I had this one back home, and I was able to find it in a box in the shed. And so I brought it back here with me. So this will definitely be read. His writing is amazing, so I know this will be great. And my last must that I really would love to read is My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Talent. This caught my eye because Stephen King praised it as a masterpiece, and I said, oh, well, Stephen King, an author I truly admire and love, rates this book so highly, I know I have to read it. And it's gotten such acclaim. And can we just take a second to appreciate this amazing cover? It's just so striking and eerie, and I went out of my way to order the UK edition just because I think it would just sets the tone, I think, for what the story is better than the American edition. So I knew I had to have my hands on the UK cover. So that is all I have for now. I will hopefully be able to make more videos now that I'm home from deployment, and we will be here for a while, and I'll have lots of fun reading experiences to share. And until then, happy reading.